If you do any prospecting with LinkedIn, you have got to go get set up with Surf. That's SURFE. It's a tool you can use to add new contacts to your CRM system directly from LinkedIn in seconds. I'm using it every single day. I add contacts, follow my deals, keep track of notes, and it ends up saving me a bunch of time on prospecting and outreach, which means I can spend more time moving my deals along. The data is always 100% accurate since I don't have to copy and paste all the fields over from each and every contact that I want to put in my CRM. Instead, Surf does that all automatically with just one click in about 60 seconds. The team over at Surf has put together a very special offer for fans of sales players. There's a link down in the show notes, and you can use the promo code JWSurf5. Don't forget the E at the end of Surf. That's JWSurf5 for 5% off your first year. Don't spend another minute doing things manually. Go get set up with Surf.
I'm thrilled to introduce my guest today. His name is Brent Keltner, and he's the president of Winalytics. So Brent came on the show to talk about a concept that he developed, or a methodology more so that he developed, called the value-driven growth methodology. And him and his company, Winalytics, actually go out and coach clients on how to implement this specific methodology. Now, Brent comes from an academic career. In fact, he has 10 years of experience as a revenue leader in enterprise and early stage companies, but he's also got 10 years of experience as a Ph.D. and social scientist at Stanford. He later joined the RAND Corporation, and he's worked with clients that include AdmitHub, Ascend Learning, Credo Reference, DealerRater, Lexmark, Mursion, and TrueFit. So he talks a lot today about positioning your value and your product as you're having those early stage conversations with your prospects. I found a lot of value in the discussion, and there were definitely some notes that I took that I'm planning to implement in my calls in the coming weeks. So without further ado, welcome Brent to the SaaS Sales Players. So we're live. Brent, welcome.
Hey, Jesse. Good to be with you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got in touch. And I from our pre-conversation, and I always reference this on the show, that we get a little time in before we go on air. But from our conversation just now, I'm excited to hear about some of the things that you guys coach on. I think, from my understanding, there's going to be a lot of good takeaways for an individual seller after listening to this episode. So I want to dive into that. Before we get there, though, as always, I want to hear a little bit about how you got into sales and maybe some of your career progression, and then anything specific around tech sales that you've done as far as highlights, because it's always helpful. For me, early in my career, it was always very helpful to go look at folks who've been doing this for a while and see what paths they took to get to where they are today. And so I'd love to hear your story too.
Yeah, well, I don't know if my path can be emulated or anybody would want to emulate it. My handle, we do have a book coming out. We'll talk about that in a second, is Sales Professor. Because I literally was a professor. I spent 10 years at Stanford and the RAND Corporation doing qualitative research. And I was good at qualitative research. I was even better at bringing dollars in the door. But there was no reward structure for it. So one year I was the principal investigator or co-principal investigator in about $3.5 million in grants. And they sat me down and said, Brent, great year. This year you get a 3.5% pay raise, or 5.5% pay raise rather than a 3.5% pay raise.
Yeah.
I was like, I got to find a different skill set. So I went to the dark side, as academics said. I worked with Kaplan, their higher education group. And then I went to EduVentures and Plus Delta Partners and Collegiate Link and had 4 really quick growth successes, and then realized there was a method to the madness. So that was my kind of how I got into selling.
So very non-traditional compared to a lot of the guests.
Very non-traditional.
And you said 10 years as a professor at Stanford.
Well, no, I was a doctoral candidate. I did teach there, but then at RAND, I was a researcher and I taught at the RAND Graduate School.
Oh man. Stanford has, I think, probably the most beautiful campus of any that I've ever seen. And I'm a nerd in that I like to go walk college campuses. But that's incredible. And, such a great institution. There's so much tech history there also. And business history, of course. So that's really, really incredible. First question would be, what kind of things do you think transferred over from your career as, in academia to selling and to business?
Yeah, and it's a great question. And it's one of the, questions we talked about before is what's different about your selling. I was not trained, obviously, in traditional sales methodology, and that is great for me for this following reason. When I was at RAND and I was doing interviews on training and organizational development with bank executives and insurance executives and telecoms executives. I'm an academic raised by educators. And so I was like, oh man, I got to develop a set of corporate behaviors. I got to say what's in it for them.
Right.
So I would always reach out, not about RAND or the project, but hey, this is what you're going to get out of participating in this interview. And these are the other banks in New York or Chicago that we're working with, right? The name drops, the peer proof. And in the calls, I would always actively recap what I heard them say, and I'd always send a follow-up email. So I learned to do what we call now an authentic conversation, authentic buyer journey to build engagement. So when I got to the commercial sector at Kaplan first, but then was really at Edge Ventures, I had my own go-to-market team, marketing, sales, account management into product. And I went to all my buddies who were in business, and I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing in sales strategy, or I didn't think I did go-to-market strategy. Like, what are you working on? So they sent me all these documents that were all about product positioning and product battle cards and competitive positioning and feature and function. I was like, where the hell is the buyer in this?
And why do they care? Yeah.
And why do they care? So I went right back to train my sales teams on what I had done at RAND. Start with why they are on the call with you. End with where do they see the most value and what will they do about it next? And just see, ask them if they see fit and what can we do about it together. So because I learned in a different way, I was able to build a model, which I then trained my teams in, for quick growth successes, because we didn't focus on the product. We focused on how our product made our buyer more successful. And then I started Winalytics as a consulting practice to help others do the same.
How do you think, so obviously a different out of the box approach. Where do you think you came up with those behaviors? Because those are, and in retrospect, I think in 2022, we know buyers respond very well to the what's in it for me approach. And they obviously respond well to consistent follow-ups and some of the other behaviors. Those you just would have built those in, in your career in academia. I guess I'm curious, how those habits formed.
I think there was one that was intrinsic, and I think there were others that were learned. And so these are two of our keys to deal velocity. Let's take the intrinsic one first, which is I'm naturally curious. I'm just curious why people do what they do. And that's genuine, and you can't fake that. What I would encourage anybody who's in an early sales role is figure out what you're passionate about.
Right.
Like what products represent you well. And I don't care if it's selling baseball caps, right? Wholesale, or it's selling a SaaS software, or it's selling some kind of, retail service, but figure out what you're passionate about. Because at the end of the day, you will do better if you are genuinely curious about your buyer and what they are doing in their day. So most discovery, you heard me say this, is shallow discovery. We ask a lot of polite questions to show social courtesy. And then guess what? We never use that information when we talk about our product, and we piss off our customers. Like, why the hell did I just spend 10 minutes telling you all this stuff, which you never even bothered to use? So focus discovery, not on shallow discovery, value discovery. Where is your buyer today? What would make them more successful tomorrow that you can help with? What do they do? What are they working on? What are their key goals? What are the key initiatives? What's keeping them from being more successful? What can you solve to make them more successful? Focus on that. What's the buyer's success statement, success criteria, more successful future? That's value discovery. If you do that because you like what you do and you like the product, you will win a lot more all day long.
Yeah. Yeah. I also love what you said about genuine curiosity. I think that's really good advice. If you're not passionate about what you're selling, and also if you're not just insanely curious about what makes your buyers tick, then it's going to be really hard to motivate yourself to do the behaviors, which is the, consistent follow-ups and asking the hard questions and making the phone calls and sending the emails. If you are curious, then it just sort of feels more, I was telling this to somebody else today. It feels to me sometimes like I do detective work. I'm not a salesperson. I'm a detective. And part of my job as a detective is going to uncover what's wrong in a business and diagnose some areas where we can help and figure out how people tick. I was telling this individual that I use LinkedIn when I prospect, and we were talking specifically about building org charts. And I was sharing how I like to use LinkedIn because I like to look at the face of the person that I'm reaching out to. Or I like to look at the person that I'm building into the org chart, because if you just have a name and a title, there's really nothing else there. But if you're looking at someone on LinkedIn, you can see where they've worked before, you see where they're based, you can see where they went to school. There's so much more data that can give you that can help at least give you some hypotheses around what's in it for this person and what makes them tick a little bit. So I think those are huge. And yeah, I want to dig a little deeper here. So I think the question that's going to help us
before we leave it, I just, kudos to you. The detective analogy is awesome. And when we love what we do, the other thing, they sense that they're like, hey, this isn't a salesperson, it's a peer thinking about how to solve problems. Again, whatever you're selling, it's like they're talking about, they clearly think about this as well. They're not trying to sell me something. We're like peers trying to solve a problem together, and that's magical. And it just builds natural engagement when you love what you do and what you're selling. So that's a great way to think about it for your audience. Be a detective.
Yeah.
Be a sleuth together with your buyers.
Yeah, that's how I think about it. And it again, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if I wasn't insanely curious about how my customers operate and what's in it for them. I love that. I love selling deals so I had a prospect call me back about a year ago. We had done a large contract. This is a big home services company in the US. And excuse me, this prospect called me and said, man, I got the highest bonus that I've ever gotten this year because we were able to implement your system and you helped us do that. And it was insane. It's going to change it's going to change things for my family in a big way. That was more rewarding than the commission from that sale in a lot of ways. And I later had that person's manager tell me, this is a publicly traded company. They said, Jesse, it must feel pretty cool to feel like you've influenced a stock price for a public company. And I was like, I never thought of it that way. Never thought of it that way. That's obviously not what I set out to do, but in solving problems for the business and implementing solutions, it impacted their financial direction, which was really interesting. So that's the key.
Let me ask you on that one. How many times did you end up going back to that person as a reference for other potential buyers?
100%. So not only are they a good customer reference, they're someone that I've also used for job interviews. And that's a fun thing to offer up as an AE is, hey, yeah, you can call my old boss and they're going to say what they're going to say, but why don't you call one of my old customers and hear what he has to say about the work that we did together? Isn't that, in a lot of ways more important than what my old manager is going to say about me? So I've got him on speed dial for both of those activities. And I actually might have him on the podcast at some point too, to sort of share a buyer's perspective as someone who's signed, some very large contracts with tech vendors. He knows what's good and bad when it comes to, what's in it for me. And he's done some pretty deep evaluations and, he's in a very competitive business where lots of tech vendors, lots of other kinds of vendors also are competing for business with this company. So I may have him on the show at some point. He's a really great guy.
Awesome. And then just to point out, so for some of your folks, again, earlier on, like the reason to focus on what your buyer's trying to accomplish and then helping them accomplish it is those folks are gold that you're going to use. When you reference for the next accounts, use them again and again, and honestly, use their stories, because what your buyers want to hear about is less from you than how have you made my peers more successful.
Right.
So you got your 3 or 4 go-to stories from people like that. And it's like, hey, when I worked with Joe so-and-so at this, and they, this was the outcome for him, could we explore whether you and I could have a similar outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to dive in a little bit to the work that you do at Winalytics. I know, I think you encounter a lot of sellers and a lot of teams in the work that you're doing there. And I think a topic that can get our conversation really in depth here is, what do you see the best sellers doing differently than the not so best, the not so great sellers out there?
Yeah. And so you asked me, what did I do differently? I
Yeah.
talked about the one that was intrinsic, and then I talked about the one that was learned. And the one that was learned is I started to run all of my meetings, these research interviews, in 3 parts. And then I trained my sales teams to run meetings in 3 parts, which is you start with the buyer why.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they there today? What are they hoping to accomplish? What would make them more successful? And often you want to give a brief overview on you just because it's courtesy, but hey, what could lead you to get the most out of this call? If you are, let's take Ready Education, because I'm going to give an example. They have an engagement platform for students on college campuses. So, were you most interested because you wanted to think about building peer-to-peer community, or about just centralizing all of your communication so you don't have multiple ways of communicating from students? There's one way to do it, or some other goal. Would love to know more. So start with your buyer why, because now phase 2 is when you talk about your product, you can link back to, I heard you say you're interested in this. Here's how our product can help. So phase 2 is you always link your product. Any generic product conversation is a snoozer for your buyers. Without connecting it to their goals, which they shared, your product sounds like blah, blah, blah. It's just noise.
Right.
So phase 1 is figure out why they're there. Phase 2 is talk about your product through the lens of why they're there. And phase 3 is end. And always, we always say, hey, we're coming to time. We got 10 minutes left. I want to just make sure we have time to see, what your feelings on where we might add the most value, if we have fit or not. And then what would we each want to do next? So phase 1 is why are they there? Phase 2 is how can we help? And phase 3 is what do we each do about it to qualify to the next meeting? If you run your meetings that way, and it takes practice with every client, I used to build it with my teams, is 1-page checklist that I can immediately after a call say, okay, what did I get? What didn't I get? What do I need to get the next time? Just practicing that 3-part meetings will put you on a different plane.
I definitely love the 3-part, and I'm going to try to incorporate that in some of my meetings. What kind of stuff would be on the checklist? I'm curious, what sort of items would you be looking for in a call that's structured that way?
Yeah. So the first part is probably, just prompts on, like, it's better to start with initiative questions and goal questions. Hey, tell me more about, what initiatives you have in your call center currently. Are there things around cost control or, better user experience? Okay, great. Tell me more. How does that relate to any business goals? Right. So who set the goals? And, as you think about that, do you have a goal for where you want to be 6 months from now, 9 months from now? So just tell me more about what you're trying to accomplish around things we're working on. So that's the first part. Okay. Second part of the checklist is, what did I present capabilities that align to their goals? Did I offer something that's unique in terms of what's unique about our positioning? And did I share any customer stories on who else I had helped? And then the third part is, did I recap your success statement? Did I ask you to take a next call? And did I ask you who you're bringing to the call and why? Right? Why would that person need to be involved? So it's like 3 parts, 3 checks. Did I get that? Could I put it in a follow-up email? Could I recap it at the end of a call?
I think 3 is easy to remember too. It's not impossible to think about. There's really 3, cornerstone outcomes from every conversation. And if you hit on those, obviously there's some substance underneath those, but breaking your calls into, 3 parts, 3 stages does, I think, simplify it versus, I don't know, you have an agenda with like 5 or 6 or 7 different bullet points on it, and you're going to try to get to all of it, but it doesn't necessarily come together seamlessly. I think that's a really, really interesting approach. So, okay, cool. And so what kind of prep goes into something like this ahead of time? How do you guys coach reps to prepare beyond just the checklist? What other ways can someone prepare for these conversations?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you said is like, if you think about that, it's like, okay, what are the what are the goals that I think probably could come up? And I'm going to look at their LinkedIn profile. I'm going to do a quick look at their website. I'm going to do any Google's press releases on, is there any business initiatives? Is that person quoted in any way? So I'm going to go in with, as you said, I love that word, hypotheses about, what they might be interested in. And so then I'm just going to think, hey, might be these 2 or 3 things. Okay, what product capabilities, a little bit of prep, what I talk about, what stories might I share, so that you're already kind of road mapping in your head what we talk about as situational fluency. You're not kind of caught off guard if it's like and over time as you prep them, I mean, there are probably only 3 or 4 buyer goals any product really sells into. So if you think about, okay, by goal area that I hear, what are my capabilities? What are my stories? Now you are just prepping those. What's their role? What do they care about? What can I learn about their business initiatives so I can better speak to those with my, their pre-canned talk tracks and stories, but now you can pick them to align to what your buyer cares about.
That's great. I mean, I'm sure this is more rare than this would be the exception, not the norm. How do you coach someone who says, man, I had this call with such and such a company and it was a group of 3 or 4 people on their side and they were just tight-lipped the whole time. Maybe one person on the team spoke up, but the other 3 people, they were technical buyer personas. They didn't care for the sales technique. They were just, sort of there. Again, I think this is a fictional scenario because for the most part, when you're on a call with these type of buyers, they're usually pretty eager to talk about the why and the what's in it for them and to talk about, the overlap in the middle. So what would you say to someone who says, man, I got this prospect that every time we get on the phone, it's a tough crowd. They won't open up on what they really need. Maybe they're wasting my time. Maybe their manager asked them to be on this call. How would you, help stimulate a conversation like that using the 3-part technique?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we do have just a very simple technique, and it's part of that value discovery is just to pause and just the talk track, look, SAS, there are hundreds of things I could show you all and I could bore you to sleep. I really need to know before we start, what are the 2 or 3 most important things for all of you? And if you don't know right now, let me just talk you through the most common scenarios for our buyers, and then I'll send them to you in an email. You guys can talk about it and agree, what do you want to focus on? And then I'll focus, we can set up another time, we can focus on that. We'll save all our time today for when we're better prepared for what you want to talk about.
That's really good. And I always try to put myself in the shoes of who my buyers are. And I've just got to think that buyers respect the hell out of that too, because look, I'm not going to sit here and do a tap dance for you for 30 minutes, 60 minutes. That's poor salesmanship. What I am going to do is really try to boil it down to what's specifically the why here. And if there's an overlap, let's try to figure out what that is. And then let's establish what that means. Right. So I think in 2022, most buyers would genuinely appreciate the simplification of it and just focusing on what's important versus, back to what we talked about earlier, coming in, not listening, throwing a bunch of features and functions out there, opening up a demo environment, specifically to SaaS, when you have someone that opens up the software interface and says, let me show you all the cool things we can do. And here's how this works. And here's this integration. And here's this screen and this report. I think, rather than do that, like you're saying, it's coming in and doing that value discovery to find out what's the most important. And then I think what I imagine a lot of your clients and the reps that you work with end up finding is that it's easier to close deals because you have, you're kind of cutting through the hedges and you find just that clear path to victory versus having to circle around the bushes 100 times to try to figure out what everyone wants to accomplish. But yeah, maybe you've got a story or something you could share on that.
No, bingo. I mean, you just said it great. It's like it gets you to yes or no quicker. And that's what we want. We don't want maybes in selling, right?
Right.
So I think of Greg Carter at TrueFit, who they were a client. It's a retail personalization platform. So they sell to like UGG and Macy's as a web app where you can basically put in your personal parameters and get style and fit recommendations. And so in 2019, we started working with them. They got a ton of first meetings because everybody had that problem. Can I get to the right product? And then they'd have a lot of meetings that, stalled, a lot of deals that stalled, or that went multiple demos and then never went anywhere. And after we started working together, and, this year they had a record year, and I was just kind of interviewing Greg, we were doing our own success story with them. He's like, every tech company gets really excited about their own product innovation.
They do. Yep. Can
And
confirm.
we forget that it's all about what is the buyer's goal?
Right.
Because they'll listen. Everybody's excited by transformation. Doesn't mean they're going to buy. He's like, everything's shifted. We just changed our conversations to not to be excited about our innovation, but to be focused on why they were there, the business goal. And so they hit their goal in October like 10th of this year, smashed their annual goal total and had a lot of things that were working for them, but it was the sales positioning and execution. So it works there, but I'll tell you on the point you made, I once had a conversation with Strayer University, and the provost had been the champion. So a senior person who had walked through, this was a platform that helped measure foundational skills like critical thinking and problem solving and stuff like that. I had a conversation, and then she set up a follow-on call with her team, and she couldn't attend because she was sick or had to stay home for her daughter or something. So the team showed up and was exactly what you just said, all sort of like mom and like, oh no, we're all set. No, we do that already. And 10 minutes into the call, I was like, all right, sounds like you guys are all set. It sounds like it was a misunderstanding on your provost part. Doesn't sound like there's anything we could work together on. So am I right? You guys don't see any of this stuff could help advance your goal? And they said, yeah. So the seller who was on that I was managing on the call was kind of shocked. But I just followed up the email to the provost and said, I recapped to your team, these were the reasons you were interested. And they didn't seem to think those are relevant. And I CC'd them. She literally emailed back like 60 seconds later, said, that's exactly what we're interested in. 3 weeks later, we closed like a $150,000 deal with Strayer.
That it's so funny how, I've seen that so many times where if you just go to the heart of it, and a lot of reps just don't spend the time doing almost trying to disqualify an opportunity. And that's exactly what you did. You went in and said, well, look, if there's nothing here, I want to just do one last due diligence one last bit of due diligence to confirm. But if there's nothing here and the group doesn't want to see what want to hear what I have to say, or doesn't want to work with me on figuring out how we can meet together in the middle, then what else can I do? And I think a lot of reps seem to, they just get married to the opportunities they're working on, or they get married to the conversations they're having. And rather than just be direct and say, all right, well, hey, look, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste mine. Let's call it. I'm going to send one last email to the provost just to make sure, but that's it. We'll call it a day, rather than, just are you sure? And maybe if I show them this, and maybe if I demo that, or maybe if I give them this value pitch or whatever it is, they just, they take so much longer, and it's just much less of a hassle to just, again, go right to the heart of the matter. I love that story.
Yeah. Product doesn't close anything. I mean, this is your instinct on that is strong. It's like your product is a tool.
Yeah.
Right. To demonstrate that you can bring certain outcomes, but if they don't have an outcome they care about moving forward, we lose in selling mostly to inertia. Right. The number one reason we lose is not because they bought something else. It's because they didn't do anything.
Right. The status quo is the biggest
status quo. So until they articulate a better future that they're willing to invest in, there isn't a sales opportunity.
Mm-hmm. What else? I love this. I love your stories because they're, right. Again, they pack a lot of punch, and they're very relevant to my listeners who are out there every single day having conversations and likely trying to figure out how to build a strategy for themselves to move things along. Tell us some other stories, or what are some other things that we can learn here?
Yeah. I mean, this is another one you and I talked about before. I would very strongly encourage folks that are early on in their career to build the habit of thinking about micro presentations when you demo.
Right.
micro presentations. We all the time start working with teams that have like these, 20, 30, 40-minute demos literally where they're just droning through and here's the user experience and here's the administrator experience and here's the dashboard. And, they haven't spoken back to any buyer value. So people check out and they're all working online, politely in the meantime. So think about this, like that you should demo, and we talk about 5 to 7 minute kind of bursts.
Mm-hmm.
Every micro presentation should start with, I heard you say that you're working on this, so I'm going to present this part of our functionality. Does that sound right? Does that sound of value? Okay, here's how we solve for that problem. So again, ready education, like, oh, this is really all about building peer community. Okay, well, let's show you the part about that builds peer-to-peer community, makes it easier for kids to collaborate, find each other, like-minded interest groups, or this is all about minimizing the number of communications from different departments. Okay, let's show you that part of the platform. So 5 to 7 minutes, recap their goal, align your product, and then share one of your stories.
Yeah.
When we worked with Campus X, when we worked with Marquette, they went from 5 platforms to 1 platform, reduced their costs, and found more student satisfaction. So put a story at the end of every one of those micro presentations, just because stories sell, not your product functionality. And then stop and just say, hey, of those things that I shared with you, could you put any of those to use? How would you put those to use? Where's the first place you would put them to use? Most of you now stop and listen to demos you see, and I do this as well, so I'm not calling any particular. Most questions that people ask in a demo are totally useless. What do you think?
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? Any questions? Like, really?
Yeah, no, and I especially oh, go ahead, please.
Well, just that, think about 5 to 7 minute bursts, right? And you're saying, I'm sharing this because you shared that. Here's a story. And then just ask them, from what you've seen, could you put that to use? How would you put it to use? Don't just say, what do you think? Say, do you see anything useful here? Where's the first place you would apply something like this? Are you activating them around a problem you can solve?
So micro presentations, that's what you guys call that.
Yep.
And I like it because I think in this day and age, attention spans, especially in the Zoom selling world, are very, very short. And there's a million bells and whistles always going off. And if you're trying to, spend 30, 40 minutes demoing something and you're expecting a full audience and a full attention span for that, I think you're very misinformed. And so I think, like you said, breaking it into these little micro sections and always pausing to ask. And this is something that took me a lot of practice in my career, was pausing to say, is this resonating? What I heard was, you guys have a challenge in this area, and I'm going to show you now how we would think about solving that. Right. And I think there's also an approach to trying to not be too assumptive either. And a lot of sellers that I hear are very assumptive. We will be able to, we could definitely solve your problem with this bell and whistle or this feature or function. And rather than say, here's how we think about it, or here's what we've observed from other clients, using words like we've observed with other clients that when they had this same challenge, they did this. And to your point, how would you go about, using our platform to solve that challenge would be one example. But pausing all the time and just keeping it in short bursts versus, again, a 30-minute presentation keynote with, some glimpses of the software interface or the, whatever else. So I love it. This seems like a
presentation keynote. Good summary.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm gonna steal that.
Please, by all means. Take that one.
But wanted to pick up on one other thing you said, which is, I think for folks that are earlier in their career and have the opportunity to build the right muscle, I started to say, and we have some posts that are coming out on this, selling doesn't work. Be a buyer guide, right? To your point, like, you got to ask them to take ownership, because sellers can't close deals. We can guide people to understand the value. We can guide them through the steps in their buying process. But that assumptive posture, really what you're doing is taking ownership away from the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And we need them to step up, because it doesn't matter what I do, it's what they do that matters the most.
Yeah, that's dead on. Buyer guide is what you guys, so that's a great way to put it. And yeah, I think, prospects, they smell I've heard it said as commission breath. I've seen, some of the other thought leaders out there on LinkedIn posted as commission breath. They can smell the commission breath. And if you're being assumptive, if you're calling their baby ugly, which happens all the time in software, you might have someone who's very technical, who built a homegrown system that's solving a big business problem. And then you come in with your fancy venture-backed, slick interface system, and you're going to call what they spent, 18 to 24 months stringing together with lines of code ugly and inefficient. And so it really, and I don't even know, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. Myself, I just try to be empathetic. I've had some leaders call me out on, hey, you're being very assumptive in this call, or I heard you tell that prospect that their homegrown system was kind of, janky or ugly or whatever word. I probably didn't use those words, but at the very least, I might've said, what you're not getting with your homegrown tool that we can do is this and that. And it sounds very assumptive. And it sounds like, wait a minute, you don't know anything about our business. You're coming in trying to tell me how to, build the technology stack in our company. That doesn't make any sense. You're a sales guy. But I'd be curious how you would coach someone towards being more, and we can use the word empathetic, because I think it is empathy, but also just being having a little bit more situational awareness when they're interacting with their prospects and not being overly assumptive.
Well, I think you said it earlier in the call, the best thing to do, honestly, when you talk about your work with peers, or you talk about customer stories, now it's not assumptive, it's just dialogue, right? So another way to say what you just said is, so cool. It sounds like you guys made a lot of progress on your homegrown system. We do find some of our other clients, when they get to their homegrown system, they can kind of hit this constraint. Mm-hmm. Over time, they'll hit these constraints in terms of functionality or data. I don't know if you guys are experiencing that, but just curious if you're seeing similar things to other peers. So you put it as a statement around, what you're seeing with peers or other users, and just asking if they're experiencing something similar.
Yeah. And I know I used the word observe earlier. That's one that a manager armed me with a few years ago and said, you need to say, we've observed working with our other clients. It's not assumptive. It's just been our observation. We're not saying that's the gospel truth, but we are saying that it seems to be the trend when we work with clients like yours. And this is how we've gone about solving that problem before. So yeah, it takes away that assumption.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we've started to talk about a lot is, even in the high pressure world of sales and revenue generation, the golden rule applies, which is, if you serve your buyer first, you will do better yourself. And I'm just now going to assert that, because I've been doing this for 20 years, first 12 as an individual producer, the last 7 as a consultant. You got to trust the process. When you focus on your buyer and your buyer's why and not you, you will close more dollars faster, and you will not have conflict in your day. It just works.
It feels better too. It's more rewarding. This is a really tough profession, and you've been doing this a long time. I'm still starting out in some ways, but also feel like I've been doing this for a long time. 10 years in sales is probably like 20 or 30 years in another profession in some ways. But to your point, I think if there's a reward element to it beyond just the commissions and beyond just the brownie points internally and at hearing the bell ring when you sell something, it's being able to actually fulfill on something, solve a big business problem. And that's why I encourage a lot of people to try to get into the enterprise side of selling, just because I really enjoy the strategy of it, getting into big companies that I probably shopped at as a kid, think Macy's or whatever, big brands that have been around for a long time have big problems. And when you can come in and actually solve those, it's very rewarding. And if you're putting the buyers first, like you say, it just, there's a good karma about it. And, I don't know if everyone believes in karma. I at least believe in business karma. What goes around comes around in terms of how you put yourself out there in business. And yeah, I think you're exactly right.
And you can 100%. I'll just say this for your skeptical viewers. I am a hyper competitive guy. I hated to lose. Until I was 15, I couldn't play a board game that I wouldn't. Anyway, I hate it. I hate to lose. I'm still hyper competitive. This was more of a learning for me. That honestly, when you sell this way, it got me to my goals a heck of a lot quicker. I mean, I was naturally curious, but I wanted to win. I wanted to win. I wanted to put points on the board. I wanted to make more money. And I just found the more I anchored on my buyer's why, always recapped it to them, always had them confirm it, had them take ownership, had their boss take ownership. Just focusing on that, it was like the quickest path to victory, figuring out which deals I could drive to a close, forget my time on all these iffy, maybe, yets, but tire kickers. It's just like, I wanted to win quicker. So I was going to focus on the people with a clear why, a clear, more successful future that I could solve. And it works. And it's better for your buyer. And it is good
really
for karma. It's also good for your pocketbook.
Good for all. Yeah. Win, win, win.
Win, win, win.
I want to shift gears here a little bit, and we're coming up pretty close on time here, but I want to sort of run through a quick exercise for my listeners and for you. Let's suppose there's someone out there listening to this episode, or handfuls of people hopefully out there listening to this episode who are like, this Brent guy is really interesting. I want to get in touch with his company and work with them. It sounds like they deliver some pretty good hands-on coaching, and they have some great ideas and frameworks for success. If I were to call up Winalytics tomorrow and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I lead such and such team in sales, what's sort of the first thing that you do with a new client that comes on board? And I'd love to learn a little bit about your new client process, your onboarding process. What can I expect as a new customer of Winalytics in my partnership with you?
Well, the first thing we always do, even in the the partnership phase, is we'll do a go-to-market assessment. And if we're working with sales teams, that we'll include it. It really is just a way of, like, we do it for free. Right. And we're basically just asking for a set of documents that are looking at how holistic is your go-to-market strategy. The prospects that are coming over to you from marketing or prospecting sales team, how well are they being educated? How well are they being qualified? Are you doing the right things to anchor in the buyer why? So it's all about, do you have a value-driven go-to-market strategy? So that's the first thing. It's free. And
very cool.
We qualify people in terms of, are they a good fit? Are they solving for problems we can solve for? And then under mutual NDA, we'll kind of review documents and we'll do an hour presentation. We always try to get to 2 to 3 things that they could focus on, even if they don't work with us. So that's thing one, is just value-driven go-to-market strategy. Where are you? What could you improve? When we start to work with teams, our very first thing is to build what we call value plays, and we do it in about a month. And it's with the leadership, usually sales and marketing leadership. And it really is just saying, how good are we at asking our buyer questions to get to those success statements? And then what is our content? Do we have content to speak back to our capabilities, our stories, our insight posts, our white papers, to show how we helped solve that problem? Because most content, honestly, is organized as individual assets that can be really noisy to your buyers. And so what you want to do is just, again, go back to Ready Education. If they're working on the student community, here are a set of things we might draw on. If they're working on one communication platform, here are a set of things that we might be working on. If they're working on student retention, here are a set of things. So it makes it easier to now prospect around value, sell around value, close around value, expand around value. So thinking about, everybody has personas. A lot of times they don't connect their personas to value that actually brings your personas together around a transaction. So everybody needs value plays, and we usually do that in the first month.
That's great. That sounds like it sounds like a really good exercise for any team to go through. Now I'll ask the follow-up question that's logical at this point. So how would someone get in touch with you? Let's say there is someone out there listening that wants to get in touch and learn more about what they can do better in terms of their discovery process and go to market. How can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, they're welcome to email me directly at bkeltner@winalytics.com, WINALYTICS.com. They can also go to our book website is authenticitywins.com. Can download for free the foreword to the book. It's written by David Meerman Scott, who's a pretty well-known marketing and growth strategist, as well as the first chapter of the book. So they'll learn probably some things just from that. They can download it for free.
Awesome. And I will, just for the listeners, I'll put in the show notes that email address and the link to the book download. Brent, it's been a pleasure talking and hearing your story and getting some very actionable takeaways from this episode today. Is there anything else that you care to share to leave us with?
No, Jesse, awesome questions. And I love all your instincts are really strong. I love meeting like-minded revenue leaders, people that we're the future. Product pitching is the past.
Awesome.
The sales process is done. It's now all a mutual process. What are we both committing to? So there is a future that I'm pretty excited about.
I totally agree with that. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing that insight. Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Jesse.